So finally, after weeks and weeks of battering from fighters, ex-fighters, content creators, Ian Machado Garry responds. And is it the response that we were all expecting? Like he said over and over again during interviews on his astronomical rise to the top as an elite fighter.
I couldn't give a fuck what people think about me or what I'm doing in my career or what my life choices.
Does his response still hold that same energy? Well, no, because he went down the victim conscious route. That's what he did. He became the victim all of a sudden. We're going to have a look at that in this video here. We're going to have a little conversation about how people are covering the Ian Garry story. And we're going to have a little conversation about how perturbed I am, especially given the fact that all these other content creators and ex-fighters, the cream of the crop, are actually starting to shill really hard for Ian Garry. Nice little turn of events, I think.
I'm not surprised, motherfuckers.
So we'll get into all that. Before we do, if you could hit subscribe, like, share, I'd appreciate that. And we'll have a little look at this. To add a little bit of context to this story, what is it exactly that Ian Garry has done to warrant the amount of abuse that's coming his way? The list is so long. It's been pointed out by myself and many other people. Along the way, he's defamed people like Neil Magny, put his relationship with his children at risk in terms of custody battles where Ian Garry's statements were saved on phones and brought up in custody hearings, I believe. He's put the mugshot of Jeff Neal on a t-shirt, sold it for monetary gain, laughed about it, sneered about it. His management team, who consists of his wife, who organizes his entire life and everything he does out of his own mouth, that's not defamation.
She is the brains behind absolutely everything I do.
Has directed his career into a path where he has become the most hated guy on the UFC roster. He has been kicked out of 3 or 4 different gyms. Leon Edwards was the latest guy to kick him out because he just didn't like the fact that this kid was rolling into the gym with 50 cameras thinking he was Conor McGregor. The list goes on and on and on. That is why he is getting abuse across the board. That is why Sean Strickland is going after him. When you want to be this mainstream celebrity and you have a fame-hungry wife that's pushing everything out there into the ether for everyone to read, to see, and to understand, and to criticize. Remember, this is all open source information. And then when it actually does happen and people look at it and go, yeah, actually, I don't like the way you're behaving. So when all this stuff is put out into the ether and content creators start talking about it, then fighters start talking about it, then the media starts talking about it. The plan that you had for being famous starts to turn in on itself and starts to invert, and all of a sudden people actually don't like you.
Get some help.
They don't like the fact that you encourage your husband to start fights with people in elevators for absolutely no reason, and when he doesn't, you call him a pussy. They don't like the fact that when he walks into a restaurant, he looks around and thinks, okay, I could knock this guy out, I could knock that guy out. And when you walk into the restaurant, by chance, if Ian Garry's in the vicinity and you don't hold the door for him, it doesn't matter whether you're an old lady or a 7-foot giant, he's going to knock you out, he's going to smack you up. You better say thank you to him. This is the type of stuff that's being put out onto the internet by these people, and they don't expect any repercussions. And when the repercussions come, and they're not the ones that they thought they were going to be super famous and everyone was going to love them and put their faces on flags. That didn't happen. When it's the opposite of that, all of a sudden you start sending direct messages to people like Sean Strickland, threatening to sue him. You start looking at the smallest YouTubers who covered this story, and you hit them with defamation claims. Do you understand how serious a defamation claim is in a country like the UK or Ireland? If you're looking at the average pale in the UK for a defamation case, it's between 5 to 50,000 worth of a fine. But there is, of course, cases where that goes to the upper echelons and people are being fined 100,000 euros. And of course, if you're not able to pay that sort of money, then it might be just jail time that you get hit with. That's the type of thing that happens when you start throwing the words around like defamation and slander and claims like that, and you start going after part-time enthusiasts who talk about this stuff. You stay away from the bigger guys though, of course, because they're bending the knee. We've seen the narrative change with Ian Garry in the last few weeks. A lot of people are using his face on their thumbnails and on their titles, but when you get into their videos, they're talking about the fact that during his last Boston performance, the night before the fight, he was in a bar and he held this open training and he hit some mitts and the crowds were massive. And the fact that not many UFC stars hold that sort of power that could draw a crowd like that to a Boston bar. I'm sorry, man, but like in a bar, some dude walks in with a bunch of cameras, starts hitting mitts. Everyone's going to be interested in that. Nobody knew who Ian Garry was. Let's get fucking real here. Nobody knew who he was. Who? So when you use his face on a thumbnail and the community thinks that he's going to get called out for his abhorrent behavior, not only against active UFC fighters, but actually against small content creators, and they think you're going to call it out, and what you do is you glaze him, you start stroking his ego. They don't like that, man.
That's gross.
People are after the truth. People don't want to hear that his wife is a 10 and that he is the most unbelievable striker in the game and he's echelons above everybody else on the UFC roster. So we're just brush aside everything that he does and says and let's talk about how great he is. They don't want to hear that shit. How about you stop shining these fools and you talk about them hitting small content creators with legal action? How about you make a video about that? How about you make a video about what he did to Neil Magny? It's grand to mention it in passing, but to talk ad nauseum about how great he is and how brilliant he's gonna be and he's like the best thing that the welterweight division has ever seen is nauseating. The biggest negative coming off this Ian Garry shit should be the Neil Magny stuff. You know, his relationship with his kids was put at risk because of this spoiled fucking brat and his narcissistic, mentally ill missus. That's what the main story should be. Not how hot she looks in a bikini, who gives a fuck? And not how many drunk people this dude can get watching him in a bar. Who gives a fuck about that either? I guess the story would be different with all these YouTube content creators if their channels was hit with defamation claims. Especially if you're living in a country where the repercussions are serious. I just find it a little bit irking the way the narrative has twisted on this guy. And for someone that talks so much shit about other fighters and that says that criticism doesn't bother him, actually makes him stronger and drives me even harder. And I believe your exact words were, I don't give a fuck what people say about me. I'm here to go to the top. What way does he respond? He responds like a bitch.
I'm excited for UFC 296. I think it's a massive card. A card with a lot of big names, a lot of big matchups. I'm a little bit cautious about going to America for the safety of my family with all the that's been going on online, to protect my wife, to protect my child, to protect myself.
I'll pause it right there. You're a little bit cautious about going to the US to protect my wife, to protect my child, to protect myself. First of all, I don't know how many threats you've had. I've had a lot talking shit about you. I've had people say that my wife better watch it when she walks out the door, otherwise her face will be off. I don't know if you're getting them comments. I'm definitely getting them comments. You don't see me fucking crying about it. If I'm talking shit all the time, it's part of the game. If I'm putting my face on the internet and I'm talking shit about you, about anybody else, it's open season. Bring it on. You talk whatever you want to fucking talk about me. That's what the internet is, man. If you don't understand it, stay the fuck away from it. If your management team don't understand it, stay the fuck away from it. Stop being fucking bitches and victims. All of a sudden, you're worried about your safety in the US? What about this story? The first thing you did when you got to the US was start throwing fucking eyes at Sean Strickland because he too called you out for your bullshit. So you're not that worried, man. You're just putting it out there on record, just in case there's more defamation claims and more legal actions to be taken. Sad and pathetic. Here we have Jake Shields. He definitely needs to be cautious bringing his wife around UFC fighters. And I saw that and I was like, oh man, like, does Jake Shields, like a person who's been around the UFC and the MMA game for like 25 years, does he know something that we don't know in terms of people being angry at them? And then you scan down and he replies to it, no, it's because he's a cock and his wife is obsessed with fighters. All right, yeah, nice insight, perfectly said. Let's hear what Kobe had to say.
I've had death threats, bombings, like people wanted to kill me after Brazil. I never turned off my social media. I never turned off my comments. Look at that little Ian Garry. He's turning off his comments like a little fucking sensitive soy boy. So, you know, he ain't a tough. He ain't the biggest and baddest fighter in this division. The guy's a joke. He's a little fucking kid, so.
I'm sure that Sean Strickland, Colby Covington, all the big fighters that trigger people on the top echelons of this sport have these type of threats on a daily basis. Ian Garry talked a mountain of shit about these type of things that it didn't bother him. He's got that elite mentality that transcends threats and criticism, and it's going to bring him all the way to UFC gold, except for the first time someone starts calling him out and criticizing him, he starts crying and becomes a victim. Okay, man, you just exposed yourself again for being a bitch. Simple as that. So this is my take on Ian Garry's response to all this criticism. Sad, Pathetic. And you know what I think is more pathetic than that? Content creators who talk about Ian Garry and use him in their thumbnails to get numbers, but never actually address what this motherfucker is up to. Never call him out for what he has done. I guarantee you there would be a completely different outlook if they were hit with defamation claims. If their channels were in threat of being shut down, there'd be a different story. But because they're playing safe, that's not going to happen to them. You can just like teeter away and talk about him and get the views that way. But at the end of the day, it's about telling the truth. And this guy's a scumbag, and he's going after small content creators, he's going after UFC fighters, and he does not give a fuck about anybody. So there's no holds barred from me on this one. Absolutely not. Let me know your thoughts down below. Like, subscribe and share. I appreciate you. Cheers.